My wife insulted my appearance every time I tried to dress better. So I hit the gym, got a makeover, and left her for a kind stranger. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and when I met my wife Emma, she felt like home. We were two broke grad students trying to survive on caffeine, frozen dinners, and the occasional gas station wine. There was something magical about how icily we fit together. Her sarcasm, my awkwardness, the way we both loved falling asleep to nature documentaries. Our first apartment had peeling paint, a broken heater, and one frying pan. But it felt like the coziest place on earth. She used to tell me, "You're perfect as you are. Don't change a thing." And I believed her. Back then, I had a soft belly, unkempt hair, and an uneven beard that never quite filled in. She'd grab my stomach and giggle, my favorite pillow, and I'd laugh along, feeling lucky someone loved me exactly how I was. I didn't realize that what sounded like love was also a limitation, that staying exactly how I was served her comfort, more than my confidence. We got married. 2 years after graduation, in a small backyard ceremony, I wore an ill-fitting suit and she wore her mother's wedding dress, and we both cried like idiots during our vows. For a while, it really did feel like we were building something beautiful together, to dreamers against the world. But something shifted after the wedding. Or maybe it had always been there, and I was just too blinded by love to see it. The first time I tried wearing a tailored shirt to a job interview, Emma laughed. Not gently, not lovingly, just laughed. "Are you trying to be someone you're not?" she said, eyes scanning me like I was pretending to be a different person. I forced a smile, but something inside me curled up and went quiet. And that was the moment I realized love can feel like safety, even when it's slowly shrinking. At first I told myself she was just joking, that I was being too sensitive. She'd say things like, "You look cute today for once," and then roll her eyes like I should be grateful for the compliment. When I got a promotion at work and treated us to dinner, she teased, "Wow, Mr. Big Shot, don't forget the little people." Always with a smile, always with that tone. It wasn't mean, but it wasn't kind either. I tried dressing a little better after that, nothing dramatic, just a few button-ups instead of old hoodies. I'd catch her watching me when I got ready, and sometimes I hoped she'd say something nice. Instead, she'd smirk and go, "You know you're not fooling anyone, right?" I'd laugh it off, even though inside I felt stupid. Like I was pretending to be more than I was allowed to be. It became a pattern I didn't have words for at the time. Any time I did something that made me feel confident, a new shirt, a workout streak, a cologne I actually liked, she'd find a way to knock it down a peg. "You're getting a little too into yourself lately, trying to impress someone. You're cute when you're trying so hard." She never said, "I looked bad," just ... Never good enough. The worst part was, I started adjusting to it. I started second-guessing the way I stood in mirrors, the way I smiled in photos, the way I showed up in public. Like any effort I made to feel attractive had to come with an apology attached. And slowly, I stopped trying. Because it's exhausting to love yourself when the person closest to you keeps making you feel ridiculous for even trying. I used to be a pretty confident guy, not cocky, just comfortable. I knew I wasn't winning any beauty contests, but I liked my laugh, my voice, the way I could make people feel at ease. Somewhere along the way, though, Emma's voice replaced my own. It slipped into the quiet moments when I was brushing my teeth, when I looked down at my stomach, when I caught my reflection in a store window. Instead of hearing myself, I heard her, "Trying too hard, not your look. Relax, you're not a model." The worst part was how normal it all became. She'd make jabs in front of her friends, and they'd laugh along like it was some long-running joke. "Oh, you should have seen him in college," she'd say. "Looked like a potato in cargo shorts." One of her friends snorted, "Some things never change." They all laughed. So I did too. But I didn't find it funny. Not anymore. I remember showing up to a friend's birthday dinner wearing a navy blazer I'd bought for myself. Nothing fancy, just something that made me feel sharp. Emma looked at me and said, "Are you trying to look like someone else's husband?" That one hit harder than I let on. It's strange how someone can love you in ways that still break you. Like she wanted me to be lovable, but only on her terms. Only as the guy who didn't take himself seriously, who stayed soft and silly and easy to overshadow. I started skipping events, avoiding mirrors, and quietly, almost without realizing it, I started believing she was right. Because when someone you love keeps telling you who you You eventually forget who you were before they did. It was a Tuesday. Boring, uneventful, gray-skied kind of Tuesday. I had a client pitch that morning and decided on a whim to wear the new light blue button-down I'd hidden in the back of my closet. I hadn't even taken the tags off until that morning. It wasn't flashy or anything, just fitted, clean. Made me feel like maybe I still existed under all the emotional static. After the meeting, I ducked into the office restroom and caught myself in the mirror. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look away. I looked good. Not GQ cover good, but me good. Without really thinking, I pulled out my phone and snapped a selfie. I didn't usually take photos of myself. It always felt like fishing for validation. But this wasn't for social media. It was just for me. Then, in a moment I wish I could take back, I sent it to Emma. No caption. Just the photo. A quiet little hope folded into a text message. Her reply came 2 minutes later. "Why are you trying so hard? You're not a model, babe. Relax." That was it. No smile emoji. No compliment. Just that familiar tug, like a leash around my neck. I stared at her message, and I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I just felt this cold, deep stillness inside me. Because the saddest part wasn't what she said. It was that I expected it, and that realization hurt more than the words ever could. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I didn't hit snooze. I didn't scroll my phone. I just stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking about that text, and how tired I was of feeling small. There was a gym 5 blocks from our apartment. I'd walked past it 100 times, always telling myself I'd join eventually. That morning, I walked straight in and asked for a day pass. I don't even know what I was looking for. Maybe control, maybe quiet, maybe just a version of myself that didn't flinch anymore. The place smelled like iron rubber mats and old sweat. I felt awkward and out of place, surrounded by people who knew what they were doing. I fumbled through a few machines, wiped my hands on my jeans, and left after 30 minutes feeling ridiculous. But something kept pulling me back the next day, and the next. A trainer named Marcus noticed me one afternoon struggling with a deadlift. Instead of laughing or ignoring me, he said, "Start small. Just show up. That's the real work." He wasn't selling me anything. He wasn't mocking me. Just offering a lifeline. I didn't tell Emma. I let her think I was working late or stuck in meetings. It felt like I had this tiny secret world 1 hour a day where her voice couldn't reach me. And even though I couldn't see the changes yet, I could feel them. Not in my muscles, but in the way I walked out of that gym. Shoulders higher. Head clearer. It wasn't about looking good. Not yet. It was about remembering I had permission to care about myself. It took about 6 weeks before Emma noticed something was different. At first, it was subtle. She asked if I'd been using a new soap or if I had a better posture lately. I just shrugged and said I was trying to take better care of myself. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Midlife crisis already? Cute." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I didn't have the energy to defend something I hadn't even fully explained to myself yet. One night I came home a little late, sweat still clinging to my shirt from a brutal session. Emma looked me up and down and said, "Wow, you're really serious about this, huh?" I said nothing, just kissed her cheek and went to shower. But the next few days, the comments kept coming sharper. "Don't turn into one of those guys who thinks protein powder is a personality. Or, no one's actually checking you out at the gym, right?" There was no humor in her voice anymore. Just this tight, acidic edge I hadn't heard since college. The more I improved internally, physically, emotionally, the more distant and irritated she became. Like she needed me to stay soft, tired, and unsure so she could feel grounded. And when I started dressing better new jeans, fresh haircuts, clean sneakers, her resentment showed up in full. "You love those weights more than me now?" she asked once, half laughing, half daring me to answer. I looked at her for a long time, then said, "No, I just stopped loving being invisible." That night, she tried to initiate sex. I couldn't do it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I finally realized I wanted more than survival between the sheets. Something strange started happening around the 3rd month. For years, Emma's voice had lived in my head like background noise, always there, always commenting. But now, it was getting quieter. Not gone, just less powerful, and in its place, I started hearing something new, something steadier. It was Marcus telling me, "You showed up. That's the win." It was the old lady at the grocery store, smiling and saying, "You look sharp today, young man." It was even the cashier at the smoothie bar, asking what cologne I wore because it smells expensive. Those weren't people trying to flatter me. They were just noticing me, seeing me. And I started realizing I liked being seen for something more than how low I could shrink at work. I started speaking up more. I wasn't apologizing for existing in rooms anymore. People noticed. One coworker said, "You've got this new energy. What changed?" I just smiled and said, "I remembered I'm allowed to take up space." Emma didn't like that. She started making fun of the way I stood in the mirror while shaving, or the way I ironed my shirts before meetings. One night she said, "You're so full of yourself lately." And I just looked at her and said, "No, I'm just finally not empty." That sentence caught me off guard. I hadn't planned it, but it stuck with me all night, because it was the first time I'd said something like that and actually believed it. And somewhere deep down, I knew if I kept growing, she'd either grow with me or start trying harder to pull me back down. It was a rainy Thursday night when everything shifted. I'd stayed late at the gym after a rough day, needing the noise of clanking weights and bass-heavy music to drown out the pressure building in my chest. After my workout, I stopped by the smoothie bar in the corner of the gym, something I rarely did. There was a woman in line ahead of me, mid-30s maybe, wearing a hoodie and leggings, her hair damp from the rain. She turned around, pointed at the peanut butter smoothie and said, "That one's the only thing getting me through leg day." I laughed. It was the first time I genuinely laughed with a stranger in months. Her name was Talia. She was warm, funny, sharp, in a quiet way. We talked for maybe 20 minutes while we waited about books, playlists, the fact that both of us hated small talk, but somehow didn't mind this conversation. There was no flirting, no games, just presence, real, effortless connection. I told her I was married, not to block anything, but because I didn't want to be dishonest. She nodded and said, "That's cool. I just appreciate talking to someone who sees people." She waved as she left, hoodie pulled over her head, disappearing into the rain like some kind of quiet checkpoint in a video game. I told Emma I'd stayed late catching up on emails. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because it wasn't about cheating, it was about realizing how starved I'd become for basic kindness. And that scared me, because Talia hadn't even touched me, and yet her words lingered longer than any kiss I'd had in months. After that night, I started seeing everything more clearly. It wasn't just Emma's digs or her control, it was how deeply she'd woven a version of me into our social circle. I'd hear things from friends like, "You've really changed lately," or "Emma says you're getting a little obsessed with appearances." One even asked, half-jokingly, "Is this your hot guy era or your divorce arc?" It didn't take long to realize Emma had started planting seeds. She was telling our friends I was having a midlife crisis, that I was becoming self-absorbed, distant, maybe even unfaithful. She made it sound like I was the one leaving her behind, when in reality, I'd been playing catch-up to my own self-worth. The more I tried to defend myself, the more guilty I looked. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to play PR manager for my own reputation. I stopped going to couples game nights. I stopped replying in the group chat. I watched people I used to care about slowly drift toward her version of events, like it was easier to believe I had changed than admit they'd ignored the signs for years. At home, Emma would cry during dinner, accusing me of being cold and unreachable. She said things like, "I miss the old you," as if the version of me she controlled was the only one worth keeping. I started journaling everything, dates, comments, screenshots of conversations. Not to build a case, but because I needed to see it all laid out, and what I saw was clear. The more I healed, the more she tried to break me, and I was getting dangerously close to a line I couldn't cross. It happened by accident. Emma had gone to take a bath, and her iPad buzzed with notifications. I wasn't snooping, swear I wasn't, but the screen lit up with my face on it. Not a photo I'd sent her. A screenshot of one of my gym selfies. The message preview read, "He really thinks he's God's gift now." I picked up the iPad. It was an old group chat with her closest friends, people I'd hosted, cooked for, smiled at across dinner tables. There were dozens of screenshots of me from the past few months. Photos of my outfits, gym progress, selfies, even a voice note where I was practicing a speech for work. They were mocking me, calling me Jim Ken, saying I looked like I was auditioning for a mid-tier dating app. One message from Emma Reed. I let him think he's leveling up, but it's giving desperate. Another one hit me harder than I expected. He's becoming too confident. Might have to bring him back to earth. I just sat there, iPad in my lap, heart thudding in my ears like a war drum. I didn't even feel angry. Not at first. I felt exposed, like my self-worth had been passed around as entertainment. Like every small moment of pride I'd fought to reclaim had been twisted behind my back. I took photos of the screen with my phone, not for revenge, but because I needed proof I wasn't crazy. She came out of the bathroom in a towel, humming. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just looked at her and realized for the first time in my life I didn't know who the hell I had married. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there in bed beside her, eyes wide open. The light from her iPad still burned into my retinas. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages. Her words, the snickering comments from her friends, that awful smirk, emoji, and not just by her, but by the version of me that had bent over backward to make her happy. I waited until she was making coffee before I said, quietly, I saw your messages last night. She froze, then turned, mug halfway to her lips, and said, what messages? I held up my phone and showed her the screenshots. She stared at them, then shrugged. You're really mad about that. She said, it's just jokes. Girls vent. Don't be so dramatic. I felt my throat tighten. My eyes stung. I didn't want to cry in front of her, but I did. I couldn't help it. The weight of it, all years of biting my tongue, of shrinking to stay loved it, just cracked me wide open. I said, do you have any idea what that did to me? To read those things from you. She just looked at me like I was pathetic. And then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a confused one. A full, condescending laugh. God, she said, you really are sensitive lately. I walked out of the kitchen. I didn't say another word. I locked myself in the bathroom and slid down to the floor like a child. And in that moment, I hit my rock bottom, because I finally realized I was crying over someone who would never feel sorry for making me bleed. That night, I didn't sleep next to her. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling in the dark, the taste of betrayal still thick in my mouth. It wasn't even about the messages anymore. It was about how little she cared, how proud she was of breaking me, and how easily she dismissed my pain as weakness. The next morning, I got up before her, showered, and dressed like it was any other Tuesday. But something had shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done. I opened a new checking account that afternoon. Quietly, carefully, started transferring bits of money, small enough not to trigger questions, but enough to build a way out. I met with an attorney the following week, under the pretense of a networking lunch. He was kind, efficient, and didn't flinch when I said, I need a plan that protects me emotionally and financially. At home, I went cold. Not cruel, just unreachable. She noticed, of course. Asked what was off. I just said, I'm tired lately. She didn't press, probably assumed the manipulation was working again. I let her believe it. Let her laugh with her friends, mock my gym sessions, complain about how I was checked out. I kept a calm smile, cooked dinner, folded laundry plate, my role like a man preparing for his final performance. I even booked a weekend away. Told her it was for work, just a leadership retreat in the mountains. In reality, it was time to think. Time to breathe. Time to figure out who I was without her voice echoing in my head. And right before I left, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in weeks. I texted Talia. Just 2 words. Still up. The cabin was quiet, tucked away in the hills, surrounded by tall pines that swayed like they were trying to whisper secrets. No cell signal, no traffic noise, just the crackle of a wood stove and the creak of old floorboards. I sat on the porch that first night, wrapped in a hoodie, waiting for nothing in particular. And then headlights cut through the fog. Talia stepped out of the car, holding 2 coffees and a look that said, I'm not here to fix you, I'm just here. We didn't hug, didn't kiss. She just sat beside me in the cold and handed me the warm cup without a word. For a while, we didn't even talk. Just sipped, listened to the wind, let the silence stretch without making it awkward. Eventually, she said, you look lighter, not happy yet, less crushed. I nodded. That was exactly it. We spent the weekend like that, reading on opposite sides of the couch, walking trails without speaking, cooking simple meals in the tiny kitchen, bumping elbows, laughing when the pasta boiled over. She never asked about Emma, never asked why I was there. She waited for me to offer it on my own terms, and when I finally did late on the second night, voice cracking from the weight of itchy, didn't interrupt once. She just looked at me, eyes steady, and said, "You didn't deserve that." Not, "You'll get through it." Not, "She didn't mean it." Just, truth, I didn't kiss her. But I wanted to, not out of lust, but out of deep, aching gratitude for being seen without being judged, and for the first time in years, I went to bed without hearing Emma's voice in my head. Only my own, and it was quiet. When I got back from the cabin, the apartment felt colder than I remembered. Not physically, it was the same couch, the same throw blanket, the same framed wedding photo on the bookshelf, but I had changed, and now everything in that space felt like a museum exhibit of a life I was no longer part of. Emma greeted me like nothing had happened. "Have fun bonding with your coworkers," she said, barely looking up from her phone. I just nodded. I didn't owe her any more words than that. I had already made my decision. I waited until she went out the next date to get her nails done. I packed light, just a duffel bag with clothes, my documents, a few things that mattered. I didn't want the furniture. I didn't want the TV. I didn't even want the memories. On the kitchen counter, I left my house key, my wedding ring, and a single printed letter. I didn't rage. I didn't insult her. I just told the truth, that I loved her once, deeply, but I couldn't keep bleeding to prove it, that her words had buried me slowly, year after year, under the weight of sarcasm disguised as love, that I found myself again without her, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. I ended the letter with a line that took me days to get right. "This is not revenge. This is resurrection." Then I walked out. No dramatic slam of the door, no tears, just the steady sound of my own footsteps finally moving in the direction of peace. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look back, because for the first time in years, I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something better. I stayed with a friend for a while, just a spare room with a mattress on the floor, a lamp with no shade, and a closet that smelled like old cardboard, but it felt more like home than the apartment ever had. There was no tension in the air, no tiptoeing, just quiet. And choices. Talia and I didn't talk for a week. I needed space to settle into myself again, not as someone's husband, not as someone's target, just me. When I finally messaged her, I kept it simple. "Hey, would love to see you again." No pressure. Her reply came within minutes. "Coffee." No pressure. "But I'm buying." We met at a bookstore cafe, tucked between two art galleries. I wore a gray sweater and clean jeans, no overthinking, no performative confidence, just clothes that made me feel like me. She was already there, reading something with a broken spine and too many sticky notes. When she saw me, she smiled. Not wide or theatrical, just genuine, like she was glad I existed. Over coffee, we didn't talk about Emma. We talked about favorite childhood movies, how bookstores smell like paper and rain, and how we both secretly hate small spoons. She reached across the table once to brush something off my cheek, and in that moment, I felt the urge to lean in. Not out of desperation, but because I wasn't broken anymore. We didn't rush. We didn't label anything. We just allowed it to be simple. And when she said, "You look happy," I didn't flinch, because this time, I actually believed her. If you've ever been laughed at for trying to better yourself, if someone you loved made you feel ridiculous for wanting to feel proud when you looked in the mirror, I want you to know it wasn't your fault. People like Emma don't mock your growth because it's ugly. They mock it because it threatens the version of you they controlled, the version that apologized for everything, the version that asked for permission to wear confidence, the version that stayed small so they could feel big. When I started changing, I wasn't trying to leave her behind. I wanted to bring her with me. But not everyone wants to evolve. Some people only love you at your lowest because that's where they feel safest. And here's the truth. No one tells you. You are allowed to outgrow people who won't grow with you. You're allowed to choose peace over loyalty. You're allowed to look in the mirror and like what you see. Without justifying it, I don't hate Emma. I don't need revenge. I left her not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally started loving myself and Talia. She wasn't the savior. She was the reminder that kindness still exists, that being seen doesn't have to come with a cost. We're taking things slow. No fairy tale endings. No grand declarations. Just a people healing. And that's more than enough. So if you're reading this, stuck in a life that makes you shrink, please hear me. You don't have to stay small to be loved. You don't have to break yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Glow up for you. And when they call it a phase, smile, because they're finally seeing the light they tried so hard to put out.